Hey there, everyone. I'm Don, Professor Goway, and welcome to the GowayPro Travel Tale Podcast. Travel far and travel often. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the GowayPro Travel Tales Podcast. Today, we are coming literally from Colombia, and our two guests are Brendan Rayment, who is our Brendan. What's your title with Colombia 57? So it's right here. Sorry, my apologies.
Commercial director. Yeah.
Yep.
Commercial director. Yeah.
Not director. I have CEO, but put it this way, Brendan's the man. He's the man in charge of Colombia 57. And we were just talking off air. No, he's not in a Colombian prison. It may look that way, but he's actually in one of his meeting rooms in his offices in, what city are you in, Brendan?
I'm in Medellin.
Medellin. Okay, there we go. So obviously Colombia. And we also have with us, excuse me, Juan Sebastian Sanchez Chica, who is from Pro Colombia. And he obviously represents Colombia, and he is Colombian by birth. And Juan, where are you coming to us from?
I'm based here in Toronto, actually. Yeah.
Oh, you're in Toronto. Oh, okay. I stand corrected then. We have one of us coming from Colombia because I'm in Toronto as well. Juan, I should have had you come into the studio with us. That would have been much better.
Yeah,
However,
next time.
Yeah, next time for sure. So we have two true experts on the country of Colombia, which is what we're talking about today. However, we want to take a different tact, so to speak, and not necessarily talk about the usual suspects, though we will touch on them because it is of interest. Most people, I think, initially, boys, correct me if I'm wrong, when they think of Colombia, the first two cities would be Cartagena and Bogota, and then secondary cities would be Medellin and Cali. Is that a fair summary of what people automatically think of when they think of Colombia?
You go, Brendan.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's absolutely correct. Yeah, Cartagena, definitely, and Bogota. Yeah, you're right. And in the terms of cities, yes, and then Cali and Medellin. Yeah.
Yeah, and as we'll discuss, there is a lot more out there than those big cities. And something I like to highlight too, particularly to a lot of our agents out there who deal with cruises. A lot of people will sell cruises, which will call in to Cartagena. Those big vessels will disgorge all their clients. They'll spend a day, maybe a day and a half in Cartagena, and then be gone. And then clients will think that they've seen Colombia, and that's very, very far from the truth. And we will dig a bit deeper into the other areas of Colombia today. And one of the cornerstones, I think, of it, which will lead to other subcategories, so to speak, is the cultural mix that Colombia has to offer. Now, as I sort of summarize there with Colombia, the big cities, Cartagena, etc., the immediate thoughts. When people think culture for South America, their immediate thoughts, from my expertise and experience, would be they think of the Andean countries, which is Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, and that is a lot to do with the Incan history that's down there, very famous Incan history, of course, Machu Picchu, and then the very noticeable cultural not immersion, cultural properties, it's not the right word, but I'll use that, properties of those countries where you have a lot of the indigenous population, very, very noticeable everywhere. Colombia is less noticeable, but no less immersive and diverse in its cultural mix. So let's go to Juan on this one. Juan, there are three general makeups. I did my little research before we came on air. Do you want to touch on the cultural diversity of Colombia in general terms?
Sure. Thank you, Don. So Colombia's cultural identity is actually unique because it's not one story. It's many stories layered on top of each other. You know, the three big threads come together when we talk about the cultural diversity of Colombia. So we have from the first, as you were mentioning, the three ancestral roots. So Colombian culture is born from the encounter between indigenous civilizations, such as, I don't know, like the Muiscas and Taironas, European, primarily Spanish colonizers, and African people brought through the transatlantic slave trade that happens between those years. So what makes this different from other Latin American countries is not that just that these three roots exist, but how distinctly each one survived and shaped different regions. So you can travel across Colombia and feel like you're moving between different cultural worlds. From our geography and as a cultural engine actually of this diversity, Colombia spans 6 natural regions. So as you were mentioning, we have obviously part of that Andean, we have Caribbean, and actually Colombia is one of the few countries, and no, not the few, actually is the only country in South America that has access to the 2 oceans, the Pacific and the Caribbean, which will be like the Atlantic. We have the Amazon, we have the Orinoco region, we have the Western Andes, and all of this diversity, each one isolated enough to develop its own rhythms, dialects, cuisine, music, and worldview. So the Caribbean coast feels nothing like the Andean interior. The Pacific coast feels nothing like the Amazon. That geographic diversity acts as a preserver of distinct cultural expressions rather than like a blender. And finally, and no less important, living, breathing diversity. When we talk about that diversity as well, Colombia is home to over 100 indigenous peoples and 65 plus living languages, alongside with Afro-Colombian communities that have preserved deep African roots. So, for example, we have destinations such as San Basilio de Palenque, that was the first free African town in the Americas. It still speaks its own Creole language that is called Palenquero and was declared a UNESCO masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. The rights of people of San Andres and Providencia, for example, bring an English Caribbean Protestant identity that is completely distinct from the rest of the country. So this isn't historical diversity behind glass. It's alive, and you can still go in there, which operates obviously as Goway and Colombia 57 to make this happen. So what makes Colombia cultural identity so unique is that it's not a melting pot that dissolve like its ingredients. It's a mosaic where each piece kept its color, and together they form something that exists nowhere else in Latin America. So this fusion is officially recognized globally, and that's why we, for example, have a lot of UNESCO World Heritage sites, around 9, if I'm not wrong, and intangible also cultural heritage traditions.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing as an outsider. I can't call Brendan an outsider because he's lived in Colombia for many years now. So, he is a Colombian officially as well. But from the outside, as I mentioned, the cultural identity, and that's the perfect word. That's the word I was looking for. So thank you for that one. The cultural identity of the Andean countries is very, very noticeable in the dress and the features of the indigenous population. In my opinion, as an outsider, it's not as noticeable up front in Colombia, but as you've just explained, Juan, it's interwoven throughout all of Colombian society and culture as well. And it's interesting too, because again, on my little stats here, I think it's about roughly 4% are indigenous, grouped under a term Amerindian. Is that the right pronunciation, guys? Amerindian?
It's not a term, Amerindian. I've heard it.
Yeah.
It's not a term we use here, though.
No, not at all.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that because it's used, like if you do a search on cultural makeup of Colombia, that term is used, but it was mentioned once or twice that it's not a term that is in common use. So okay, I apologize for that, but that was a term that was used to group the many different cultures and identities within the indigenous population of Colombia. But it's only 4%. I think it's about 10% is Afro-Colombian, and the balance is European. So basically, white, Spanish, about 85%. But again, with that small percentage, it still permeates very, very richly in Colombia. If not visually initially, it's definitely there. So, Brendan,
if I may, sorry, there's also the added ingredient of many immigrants from the Middle East, from Germany, and also from Asia. And that's particularly noticeable sometimes in the looks of people in Buenaventura or in Cali. And so that all adds to this mix. And I mean, people got together, and that mix, I always say, as a foreigner, not born in Colombia, if you cut a Colombian in half, in many you will find blood from all of those, from the indigenous background, from the European and from the African descendants. It's a very interesting cocktail.
Yeah, for sure. Is that other European influence outside of Spain, and then the Asian immigration? Is that somewhat recent in like modern times, or does that go back to colonial or just after colonial times?
Well, Germans came, I think, like they came to the rest of South America in sort of like the 18th, 19th century, and again after the Second World War. But you have interesting Greek communities as well around Colombia, or you know, roots in Greece, Italy. Next to Santa Marta, there's a town, Cienega, and it has beautiful Italian architecture from Italian immigration into Colombia. But that was more recent. And it continues today. I'm one of a new wave, and there are many young Europeans and North Americans, Canadians as well, who are settling in Colombia and getting married and having kids. And, you know, the story continues. It's very open to that.
Right.
Yeah,
So
I think Don, for example, even I could be the perfect example. If you look at me, I look more than Arabic than Colombian.
Yeah.
Every time I walk around here in Toronto, people think I'm from, I don't know, like Palestine or I don't know, Turkey or something like that.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
because in the Caribbean we have a lot of migration back in the 50s, if I'm not wrong, from Palestine, from Syria, from Turkey, from other countries that came to Colombia, and they established there. And actually nowadays it's part of the culture. So if you watch, for example, the gastronomy from Cordoba, which is one of the regions that we have at the north side of the country, it's pure Arabic food. So you see kibbeh, labne, all these preparations that is part and is blended with the culture from there. So it's kind of funny because you see people like eating that type of food and say like, but this is not Colombia. What is going on here? But it's actually part of our culture. So I remember my grandmother, because we have kind of like a background in terms of that Turkey side. So part of our grandmother, they used to cook that. And if you go to their towns, there's a place that is called, for example, Cienega de Oro, where you find a lot of this Arabic food, and you can still go there and you know, and taste it. And it's prepared by Colombians, so it's kind of weird.
it's amazing. This is what I love about doing this particular part of my job, is speaking to people like yourselves about their respective countries, or someone like Brendan, who's now immersed himself literally in what would have been a new culture. Now it is who he is, or part of who he is that like you can still learn something new every single time. And while I knew Colombia was diverse in its cultural makeup, I didn't know it was quite as diverse as you two are presenting today, with such a strong European influence. Because, you know, my ignorance would suggest, it was Spanish from the colonial days, and of course African and slave trade I knew brought the black community into many parts of South America. But I didn't know of the, you know, that diverse mix of Germans, Italians, Turkish, etc., Arabic influence. And it's my question. This might be more to Juan, but Brendan, you're someone who's moved to Colombia. I know growing up in Australia that a lot of my friends, their parents, they left Europe. And this, I'm talking mainly the Greeks, Italians, that type of thing. Left their countries after World War II because Europe was completely devastated. And generally speaking, there were sort of three main destinations, and countries like Australia and Canada were looking for new immigrants. They wanted those people to come in to, you know, vitalize the economies. So there was cheap boat fares to come to Australia, Canada, or the US. What do you think was or is the attraction for someone, say, from Europe or the Middle East, to choose Colombia as a new home? Let me throw that at Brendan, because you're someone who did that.
Yeah, and I know many other people that have done so as well. I think it is because it's a non-xenophobic society, because of all of this cultural mix, you have a country that is incredibly open to foreigners, and a lot of curiosity and real interest. But it is also a country of opportunity, and it's absolutely beautiful. And one of the reasons that people enjoy coming here on vacation, and I think the primary thing they take away with them is the people, the warmth, the humor, and the diversity of the people is amazing. And being very open and warm is nice, especially when you look around the world today. And it isn't the same story in many countries where you go to and you feel that you can become part of that society. And I feel here in Colombia, that is a feeling. There's an energy here. There's a vibe. You know, this diversity creates this amazing motor, very industrious people. And I think many people think, wow, I can do business here. I can make a living, but I can also fall in love and have a great quality of life. So that's for me, were some of the reasons. And Juan may, on the historical side, well, Juan's the history teacher.
Yeah, yeah. So again, from memory, I think you passed on your story of origin, so to speak. One of our other podcasts. You traveled to Colombia originally, and that's where you fell in love with it. And then one thing led to another, falling in love literally with the Colombian, and then the business and everything else. So
I love
your
geography. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I couldn't believe arriving in Bogota and seeing a mountain going up the middle of the city. I was like,
yeah,
oh wow,
yeah,
this is just
interesting.
incredible.
Yeah, sure.
And yeah, it was the geography and the people.
Okay, then. So let's get into the cultural aspect of it. Juan gave a really good, in-depth answer with regards to the diversity and the many identities of the indigenous populations. So, do you need to leave the big cities we mentioned as we introduced the podcast, Cartagena, Bogota, Medellin, Cali? Do you need to leave those cities to get that cultural exposure and or immersion, or is the cultural experience in the more remote or less traveled areas? Let me throw that one at Juan.
Sure. So, Dom, actually, I always love to say that, and Brendan could second me on this, that Colombia is as diverse that you will feel like you're traveling into 6 different countries when you compare it into regions, and that's something that is really marked. So when you go to Caribbean, for example, in destinations such as Cartagena, Cartagena is one of those cities that you have to know for sure. Yeah, if it's your first time in Colombia, I think it's one of those destinations for first timers. You go to Colombia, you get to know Cartagena. It's cool. You can spend a couple of nights and days, and it will be great. But if you want to really get in a deeper immersion into culture and deeper immersion into something more authentic and so on, you have plenty of destinations back in the south, in the eastern, the western, because as I'm telling you, it's as diverse as you might imagine. It's one different to other. Even cuisine, the culture, the music, the way we speak Spanish is so weird, because when you go to Bogota, the way they pronounce it, the words, the way they speak. In Cartagena, as you see, I speak very, very fast. So that's all the things that are very marked into each of the regions. If you go to Medellin, they will be feeling like they're speaking kind of like Argentinian, more or less, because it's like they make with a double L. The double L, for example, they pronounce as a Y. So it's kind of rare, and each of the destination, each of the regions, you will find that. So I think over here the question would be like, where will be the best place that you could feel that cultural diversity or immersion? It would be more into what are the things that you're really as a traveler looking for in terms to accomplish by yourself. Like what is the things that really matters to you? What is the things that really you want to experience? And on top of that, you will have different options to make that happen. If you think about, as you were saying before, Andean, obviously, for example, if you see the east of the country, that is kind of the southeast, more or less, that is kind of near to Brazil, and the other part that is near to Ecuador, those areas are actually very alike to Ecuador and to Brazil, kind of, because if you like, for example, Pasto, let's say, and people in Pasto, they speak very, very alike to people in Ecuador, because they are obviously border and so on. And you can feel that as with our like with our countries that are near to us, Venezuela, Brazil, Ecuador, and so on. But there's something about Colombia that is kind of different from other countries, because we have this biodiversity that make us also change our cultural diversity. So it's kind of immersed both. The geography with the biodiversity make us be the way we are as well. Because if you analyze, for example, a country that has the 6 altitudinal zones, so you have plenty of weathers. We don't have seasons. Colombia doesn't have seasons as other countries in South America, for example. But we do have 6 altitudinal zones. So that makes us be different somehow because of the weather. People in Bogota is a little bit colder, you can say, because they have, it's a cold city, kind of. I mean, cold for them, not Canadian cold. And Cartagena is very hot, and the humidity is very high, so people is more relaxed, people is more, outgoing and so on. So that makes us be the way we are as well. So it depends, as I'm telling you, the things that you're looking for, but definitely Cartagena and Medellin and Bogota, as you were saying, is just the tip of the iceberg of the variety of destinations that you can find in Colombia.
So, Brendan, on the cultural side of things, there are many, I guess, subtopics or subheadings that you can experience from a cultural point of view anywhere in the world, not just Colombia, of course, but things like cuisine, their respective histories within the broader history of what is the modern day country, music, art, uh, local community immersion and interaction. So, can you give us some examples of what people could request, look for, or may not know about with a trip to Colombia? And before we answer that, let's just work on the assumption that someone's gone in and, let's say it's their second trip. So they've done Cartagena, Bogota, Medellin, Cali, all the above. And they're now looking for that deeper experience into Colombia. Based on a cultural interaction immersion, what do you recommend? What is out there in Colombia that you and Stroke Goway can offer to the traveler?
Well, there is a huge amount and a huge variety to reflect what Juan was saying. However, it's funny Juan mentioned Cordoba because when I was going through the notes for this and thinking about this subject, there's a town, a colonial town called Lorica. And it is amazing in the sense that the architecture is you can be in the town, in the middle of the town, and it feels like you might be in a small town in Syria or in Turkey. And it's set alongside this incredibly beautiful river called the River Zenu, which is rich in bird life. But the people in Lorica have their roots from many of them from the Middle East, and that is reflected in the food. There are restaurants where you can eat all the food that Juan was talking about. And then allied with that, very close to them, one of Colombia's most interesting indigenous cultures is Zenu. And that is an indigenous culture which is famous for using irrigation at a time when irrigation wasn't really used to that level of sophistication, even in Europe. And they are now today famous for making the Colombian sombrero, the huartiao. And it's lovely to be able to go there and see how they still hand make this sombrero from caña flecha, from like a arrowroot cane. And then on top of that, you have this huge overdose of nature and can go to a nature reserve such as Sanguare, which has been completely recovered from the sort of cattle. It was used for cattle grazing for many, many years and was nearly dead. And they have regenerated this place into the most amazing natural reserve. And it's only 2 hours away from Cartagena. And you can travel through that area and end up in Medellin as well. It's a short flight from Monteria, the capital of Cordoba, which is also home to some of Colombia's most important writers and artists, particularly Lorica. There must be something in the water in Lorica, but it has produced an interesting array of authors, artists that we have, included in our experiences in that area. It's so that's an example. But you can, in Santa Marta as well, you can, the oldest colonial city in the continent of South America, and you could, next to the highest coastal mountain range in the world, where there are different indigenous communities. You also have, of course, the Europeans. That was the base for European entry, Spanish entry into Colombia was Santa Marta. And so, mixing that with the interior of the country, in and around Bogota, it's very easy to mix a lot of the cultures and experiences in one itinerary, as long as you have time.
Okay.
I know compared to Canada, Colombia is not huge, but as a European, Colombia to me is vast. And you do need quite a long time. But coming back on a second trip, you could really go off base a little bit more and see other areas like Barichara in Santander as well. And Cali, for example, is a big city, but it's not often on the tourist map for Canadians in particular.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to a few questions on logistics if someone wants to build an itinerary solely on this cultural side of things or combine it with a more sort of traditional trip. But I want to ask Juan a question as the official government representative. Just bear with me as I sort of explain this question. So when I was a tour guide down in South America particularly, we did a couple of community overnight stays, which from my understanding, or I saw it change while I was there. From my understanding, it's got, again, not the right choice of word, worse, in that the one in question was Lake Titicaca, staying with a family on the islands, Amantani and Takia Island. And when we did it, that product had just been launched, that opportunity had just been granted by the local community. And it was fantastic because it put money into the local community. It gave foreigners a chance to experience traditional life on one of the islands in Lake Titicaca. Over the years, unfortunately, it sort of got perverted in that the locals were starting to fight over who got who. Obviously money was being made. So this experience got, I don't want to say spoiled, but it lost its organic vibe to it. I've seen that happen in a few other spots around South America. I was doing a podcast the other day. We were talking about Botswana, and the government there purposely keeps prices high because they don't want to encourage, or they want to control as much as possible mass tourism. So Juan, all these cultural opportunities that a traveler will have, I would assume the government is very, very conscious of not overexposing these communities and like doing more harm than good in the long run. So that's part of my question. Is that a conscious thought of the government and people, and Brendan for that matter, not to overexpose, exploit, whatever term you want to use, that experience? Because a lot of people these days are looking to get away from the big normal sites and do something different, and definitely something more immersive, something more culturally. So again, let's throw that one first at Juan from the official point of view, then maybe Brendan from the practical point of view.
Okay, so I'm going to start from the promotion side, and then we're going to talk about the development, because promotion is what we do at the end as Pro Colombia and as the agency in charge of that. So I think one of the best way to doesn't make that happen is actually the things that we are doing in our strategy of promotion here in Canada. So the way we are promoting Colombia here for Canadians is not as a massive tourism at all. If you analyze, for example, the type of tourism that we used to have in the 80s, in the 90s, that was one of the worst times that we have ever had in Colombia. But Canadians were traveling to Colombia, to Cartagena, to make a lot of cruise ships and a lot of that. So I remember Cartagena was well known here in Canada, and even Colombia was well known here in Canada as an all-inclusive destination because of the Cameron and all these brands and all these things. And it was good because it was a way to understand the tourism from Colombia about that time, and it was part of the trends of that time. Like you have a big time of cold season here, so yeah, let's escape this, let's go to beaches and let's just relax there, take some sun and just be there in a sun and sun destination, right? But nowadays that have changed so much. So now, for example, the trends that we are seeing in the Canadians that are traveling to Colombia are more deep into the cultural interchange that they are looking for in Colombia. So that said, make us be more responsible into the destinations and into the offer that we are promoting here in Canada. So we are not focusing this into massive destinations, into all-inclusive, into all those things. It's not that we don't have that, because actually tourism, if tourism makes something, tourism is open to everybody. So everybody can make tourism, and that's something about the tourism industry. But talking about Colombia as a destination and the way we are trying to attract Canadians to Colombia is more into come visit Colombia, but get to know in a very slow pace, in a very slow tourism, where you can have the opportunity to really get into, as you were saying before, to be in the house of a family member, where you can interchange with this host member and get to know really the destinations, rather than taking pictures yourself into Instagrammable destinations or something like that. So that's the way we're trying to promote the destination here. That's one thing. The other thing is, like, we are one of the few countries in South America that has a sustainability policy in tourism. So that makes all these companies, such as Colombia 57 and some others in Colombia, kind of, it's not an obligation, but it's kind of forced them to somehow to work on top of sustainability, not as a something that is trendy or not as a something that is like cool or fun. Is a must right now. Sustainability is not something that we're looking at as something that is gonna give us more likes or something like that. Is just the baseline to really start a very understand the tourism the way it has to be. So that's from the promotion side that what we do. So we don't promote, for example, DMCs or tour operators in Canada that they don't have sustainability policies. We don't promote here companies that they don't really have responsibility of these things. We don't promote here companies that they are aiming into this massive destination. We just promote here those companies that really understand that line of a strategy so that they can match with the clients of Canada. Because at the end, that's what they are looking for. So all really with nature and adventure, with community-based tourism, even luxury, but it's not like the normal luxury. Luxury will be more like a contemporary luxury because of the expenditure that that lives into the country, the impact that it leaves, and so on. So that's one way. From the competitive side, and we talk about product development in Colombia, main of the major like local DMOs in Colombia, they are working on top of that. And the good thing about Colombia is like we don't work this by ourselves. It's not an imposition of the government doing things. It's actually a teamwork between tour operators, between the academy, between the private sector, between all of them just adding what they think it could be better. We have seen examples, for example, to give you one in Cartagena, let's say, where the private sector push the public sector to make something happen. Because sometimes the government, and I gotta be completely sincere with you, sometimes the government doesn't deliver what it needs to be delivering. So sometimes the private sector also makes some push to make things happen. So for example, I remember we were talking about, I don't know, like the other areas in Cartagena besides the old city. So now we can see some other experiences besides the old city in Cartagena to really get into Cartagena and to get it really to know the communities and so on. And for example, destinations such as Palenque, that if you think about Palenque many years ago, it wasn't even in the map. When you see companies such as Ama Waterways creating a river cross in Colombia and getting into those towns that wasn't a lot, none of that was in the tourism like offer, and now they are appear there and they are showcasing those destinations, and they are showcasing in a way that is very respectful and is very inclusive somehow. So that's what I think that it is the way it has to be done. But as I'm telling you, it's not just a job of Colombia as a government or as per Colombia as an entity. It's a job of a teamwork that everybody adds its own like role in terms of the whole change.
Yeah,
and sorry, just to add to that, I think the different indigenous communities control themselves as well. They're very aware. They don't want to have, and many of them are not interested. And they don't want to receive tourists like visitors, but others do, and others come round to the idea, but they usually set very strict cultural guidelines for companies like Colombia 57. In order to work with them, you need to build relationships, you need to build their trust, and promise them that you're not going to bring badness into their communities, and respect their way of doing things and their decision making. At the end of the day, they have the final decision as to whether to receive people, continue to receive people. And many of them, for example, national parks, we have the Tayrona National Park. It gets closed down, a few times a year for natural regeneration. Why? Not from the government saying it. It's from the local indigenous communities insisting. It's their territory, it's their cultural territory, their sacred lands, and they insist that it is closed down. So they have a lot of power as well to make their own decisions, which is great, and they should have the final say.
Oh, no, 100%. And I sort of led that question with some negative experiences, but I also know of firsthand and through association some very positive experiences in Ecuador and Peru in particular, where local operators like Brendan and his company have gone in and spoken to the indigenous population and done it in partnership, empowered them, maintaining that they have control over their futures and their communities and everything else like that. So I just, I was just sort of using the extreme to sort of to phrase the question. And we're also here at Goway, we have refreshed our sustainability policies to bring them more in line with changing attitudes in the changing world. And we're also seeing, and this is sort of, I guess, why Colombia is also pushing this angle of visiting the country, that more and more people, as I mentioned earlier, I think both of you have, some of your answers have touched on, that people want to get away from the usual, or not get away from the usual. Of course, first-time visitors, as we discussed, will want to see the big cities and big sites of Colombia. But more and more people, even on a first-time visit, want an element of their itinerary which will be away from the crowds, something different, something cultural, something immersive. And more people are looking for that on a first trip and only that type of experience, or more commonly, particularly for countries like Colombia, on a second or even third visit. So that will segue into my question to you, Brendan. From a logistics point of view, now you sort of touched on how the indigenous communities are, how you work in partnership with them. Some say, no, not interested at all. Some say yes. From a logistics point of view, let's use an example of someone on a first visit. They're doing Cartagena, Bogota, and Medellin, but they then want to add on, as I say, a cultural experience to get to them. Now, I think Juan mentioned there, or my Brendan did, there was an indigenous community 2 hours out of Cartagena. Let's talk something distance-wise a bit further. Is it difficult to get into these areas to have this experience? Like, is it a schlep? Is it a trek? Is it a short flight? Is it a drive through the Andean Mountains, which do go into Colombia? So, Brendan, is it hard to add this on?
Well, Cartagena, I think you're referring to Palenque, which is what
Yes.
Juan was mentioning. Yeah. That's the Afro-descendant community, including, and it is about an hour and a half, depending on traffic, outside of Cartagena. And is becoming more requested, and it is a feasible option if people have a full day. You really need a full day. It's pretty phenomenal to go there, especially if you include a drumming session. It is quite out of this world. Santa Marta along the coast is an easier destination, and the Tirona to include as a day tour an indigenous community. So you can be staying in Santa Marta.
Sorry to interrupt. Isn't Tirona more of a mainstream destination with the trek to the Lost City and the beaches there, or has it expanded to offer a bit more sort of organic experience as well?
Oh no, it's always had this incredible variety of experiences, from coffee to nature to walking to indigenous cultures, of which there are many. Gastronomy, the banana industry, the actual history of the area, the European immigration. It's a fascinating destination, actually, Santa Marta. And you can have all of those experiences. Some of the smaller, more, we're talking of cruise lines, sort of expedition lines, and they enjoy going to Santa Marta because in one day they can offer their guests a variety of very different experiences than, for example, they can in Cartagena. But close to Bogota as well, it is possible to be able to go and visit and see the culture of the Muiscas and other indigenous communities in that area. So it doesn't necessarily entail a flight, but an additional flight. But if you really want to go into an area like Cordoba, then you'd need to add on at least a couple of days. And it is very well positioned between Medellin and Cartagena, and can be done by road from Cartagena as well, but it's not a sort of day experience. So you do need to have that extra time if you really want to go and see some of the communities that are not on the itinerary where you're already going.
Okay, so in summary, for our travel partners out there, to offer a more immersive Colombian cultural experience, there are options, days or short overnights out of the big cities, Cartagena, Bogota, so day trips or an overnight trip. And as you just mentioned, you can go into the heart of Colombia to do that. Now, on the heart of Colombia, again, that's my general terminology here. In Ecuador, you can fly into, I've forgotten the city's name, but it's a 40-minute odd flight into the deep heart of the jungle in Peru, up north, out of Iquitos or out of Cusco. It's a flight. Then you hook up with your boats to do your Amazon cruises. Is there an equivalent main highlight that that our travel partners can sort of get their head around, and it's an easy, I don't want to easy sell for someone to go into the interior of Colombia? Is there one city or experience that you would recommend that a agent could sort of fall back on?
That's the thing about Colombia, to be honest with you. It doesn't have just that kind of one must-see, if you like. No, it has, maybe Cartagena is probably the place that most people have heard of. And most itineraries tend to, not necessarily second itineraries, but first trips do tend to include a visit to Cartagena. But I mean, for me, the must see is to be able to have a good variety. If we receive a request and it's Bogota, Medellin, Cartagena, although you can base yourself in those places and travel outside, sometimes the question is, is that too urban? Should Colombia, nature is probably it per square meter the most biodiverse country in the world. That's one of the must sees, and to be able to combine Bogota with Los Llanos or with the coffee region, Medellin, maybe Tirona, and then Cartagena. You're having this incredible must-see of Colombia, which is the diversity, both geographic and cultural, as Juan was talking about. They're so interrelated, and urban, and this immersiveness in the nature. Because the nature is overwhelming and it is everywhere, and it is just so lush and green and tropical, but yet there are deserts and there are snow-capped mountains and jungles like the Amazon. I mean, you can fly into the Amazon from Bogota to Leticia, and the Colombian Amazon is less developed in terms of tourism than Peru and Brazil and Ecuador, and that's its attraction because it is less developed. It is more authentic and virgin, and I think Colombia, because it developed tourism, international tourism, later than those other countries, learned from those countries. The indigenous communities were able to see, oh dear, they've destroyed part of the forest to build this lodge. Well, in Colombia, we're going to do it a little bit differently. And if we have to do that, we're going to manage the lodge. And so I think that these are things that are possible. And you can fly over into the plains in the east, Los Llanos, where you have the Colombian sort of gaucho culture. But it's just that diversity, I think, is the must-see of Colombia.
If I may add, John, something. Sorry to interrupt you. It's just I like the question you made because it's actually I think the feeling of remoteness, the feeling of going to those of the beaten path destinations is what really makes Colombia truly unique. So if you ask, yes, the deeper you want to find experiences, the deeper you have to go to counter. Obviously it's going to be more difficult, and it's kind of paradoxical because you may say like, okay, it's difficult to get, for example, to the Guinea region that is at the east of the country. That actually you can find one of the most preserved and the biggest indigenous diversity that we have. We have more than 20 indigenous communities actually, for example, in the Guinea area. And one of them is, for example, the Poinave. If you look at the Poinave, and you can learn, for example, from their, the fishing, the traditional food, the medicinal plants, the meats connected to the territory, how they are connected to these big stones that are called the Cerros de Mavecure, and how they are deep connected to that. To get there, definitely, is a challenge, obviously. But it's not impossible. But at the same time, it's paradoxical because you could say, is it okay as a government to really develop ways and roads and infrastructure to get there? Or is it better to really conserve it like that, to keep it like that, to really make them be a part of everything so that it doesn't become massive, as you were saying at the beginning? So it's always that paradoxical thing. And there's a good thing, as Brendan was saying before, that communities are very, very strong. In these indigenous communities are very strong. And they're very, very respectful. And actually, the Colombian law and the Colombian constitution respect their own way of life. So they have their own way of life, and nobody and nothing can get into that. To give you an example, Palenque, again, sorry for the next to bring this back, but it's something really cool about Palenque that they don't have, for example, police in Palenque. They have their own police. So
Oh,
yeah, sometimes obviously the police get to the town and everything, but they have their own people that take care of their own. So that happens in other destinations, such as in other indigenous communities as well. So from my perspective, it's like, yes, definitely it's kind of challenging to get to that. Definitely you can find some destination where you can really get access to those indigenous communities or those cultural immersive experiences that you can get. But the remoteness, the feeling that you want to get actually is make part of the experience, as Brendan was saying. To get to Leticia, to get a flight, it will be like an hour and a half, if I'm not wrong, to Leticia. And then you take 2 hours boat ride in the Amazon River. So imagine this, in a very fisherman boat, just taking in the Amazon River to get you to a national natural reserve called as Calanoa. And then you get to Calanoa, there's just one only eco lodge that I think has like 10 rooms. I don't know, I'm not sure, Brendan, if correct me if I'm wrong, but it's very small. And this eco lodge, for example, is managed from of the owner is a photographer and the other one is a writer, journalist, something like that. So the way they perceive, the way they understand that, the way they have created, as Brendan was mentioning before, that relationship with the communities, that trust that they have been gaining with the time, is actually what makes this unique, because you don't see other well developed, as Brendan was saying, infrastructure, hotels, or something like that, and we like the way it is somehow because it's the best way to really preserve and conserve that. And the other thing is, like, when you see all these communities that are opening to this tourism, is because they understood that just somehow a way to really get some benefits of this, rather than seeing people passing by and taking me pictures or just taking me as an asset to just make them fun or something like that. So they just realize that there's something that we can do here while we preserve our culture, while we develop our culture, and when we get benefit of it.
that's yeah, well, like 100% valid. Everything both of you said. And what I found interesting is when I initially asked the question to Brendan of what's the one go to type thing. You basically didn't answer you did answer the question by saying there is no one go to because the diversity is the go to, and I find that interesting. I've done Colombia quite intensively, not as obviously anywhere near the level you guys know it for obvious reasons. But when I was looking after Latin America here, what we always ran into with, again, the Andean countries, Ecuador and Peru in particular. Now, don't get me wrong, I've traveled through both of those countries almost every corner, and they have their diversity as well. They have many, many other things, but they're a victim of their own marketing and their own success in that very few people look outside the Galapagos for Ecuador in any deep extent, and the same with Peru with Machu Picchu. And again, while they have the diversity, it's hard to get people away from those big sites. But it sounds like to me, Colombia, again, all countries have their diversity, but it really does sound like, from what you're both are telling me and are espousing, is that, as you say, Brendan, it is the diversity of Colombia, and from sea to sea, from Caribbean coast to the border with Ecuador and Brazil and Venezuela, there is so much to see and do. And it sounds like, from what Juan is telling us as well, that it is very well controlled and thought out as it's being developed. So again, that all that basically rambling by me feeds back into, if people are looking for something new and something different away from the usual, then Colombia most definitely has it on offer. That leads to my question, though, Brendan, of um, Juan just used an example of an hour and a half flight, then a fisherman's boat down to a lodge, eco lodge with only 10 rooms. When people are looking to go to these extremes, or even not extremes from a distance point of view, what is the level of service and or facilities going to be like? Should an agent be warning their clients that you're going to be rustic when you do this type of thing, or you have a choice of 5-star to rustic? Is there a sort of general statement you can pass on to me, to our agents, that they can then in turn pass on to their clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely, the more remote you go, you have to be prepared to understand, particularly in Colombia, that the accommodation is going to be more rustic. Um, but that, that's the balance against wanting to go to these areas
Yeah,
and
of
find
course.
and explore them. I mean, Calanoa is a great example. It actually is a very comfortable, quality, well built with authentic local materials in a sustainable way. One thing that a lot of people aren't ready for is the noise at night from the jungle. It
Yes.
is, yeah. Other thing, if you have a phobia of bugs or anything like that, don't
Yeah.
go, because even though they don't get into the rooms, they're battling against, when you have the lights on, the nets and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So there are these challenges. I mean, if you're going to the Amazon in the wet season can be fun, and you have to walk over a bridge, maybe of wooden planks to cross some flooded gullies to get into Kalanoa from the boat. Yeah, you really do, in many of these areas, if you're not going to sample these experiences, such as I mentioned as a day visit from Cartagena, or 2 day visit, or Santa Marta, and really get immersed in these areas, then it's, lots of insect repellent and sun cream and good shoes and a sense of adventure
Yeah.
and great food. I mean, generally, I don't think I've ever been anywhere where I've been disappointed with the food. Um, but maybe the beds are a bit hard, and the plumbing, it's just cold water. So you have it's lovely, a fresh cold water shower. But these are things that we would always, of course, make anybody in Goway who is working on a program, a trip for
Yeah.
clients who are interested in experience, we'd flag that right from the very beginning.
Sure. Well, I think
And
that's. Oh, sorry, going after you.
no, and then they can, finish off their stay with 3 nights in the very luxurious and
Yeah.
beautiful Four Seasons in Cartagena.
Yeah.
And
There
that's
you
the
go.
great thing of Colombia. You have that whole mixed match. And you were mentioning other countries. One just something that sticks in my mind a lot. Many people who've traveled in Chile and Ecuador and Peru and Bolivia, when they come to Colombia, they have fun. They get to interact more with the locals, with the Colombians. They laugh more. Just on the transfer from the airport, the driver has Colombians are huge characters. They're not shy of talking to people and foreigners and expressing their opinions, and they have great conversations here. And I think that's one of the things, the people, the charm. And when you go to these remote areas, generally, the people are very happy to see you. And you
Yeah, I
really do
must.
get to interact. You're not a tourist on the sidelines. The children will want to come up and look at you and touch you and tease you and make fun of you. And that makes that interaction that you cannot get in other countries, so much more beautiful and valid, and really makes a difference, a huge difference.
Yeah, and I must concur with that because from my time driving through South America, we were always made welcome everywhere we went. That's why I love Latin so much. It's friendly across the board. But yeah, there was a noticeable, I don't want to say change or difference, but you did notice it when you hit Colombia. There was that jovial vibe about it. I was talking to someone the other day, actually, one of our groups ladies was talking about how we're talking about how diverse go away groups can work with people. And it was a DJ who wanted to take a group of followers into Colombia. And our groups department had to hire all the DJ gear for this particular event I can't remember where it was, somewhere in Colombia. But I said, that's really weird because my memories of driving around Colombia, as you'd enter a town, this is back in the day, sort of coming out of the troubles and civil unrest with the FARC group and stuff like that. We had no issues even in those times. As you'd come into town, there'd be a police check or an army check. And as you drive into town down the main road, there was just music thumping and pumping every single town, almost 24/7. And just that vibe of enjoying life was there. And that was noticeable. And again, I often, when I speak to people about my travels and talk about, political issues and stuff like that, I have found three of the sort of countries that have had, particularly in Colombia's uh, position, had a bad reputation, were the most friendly. And my example, I'll make it quick, is when we used to overland, we at night when we'd camp, we'd look for a bush camp. Now, just literally turning off the road and finding somewhere to set up tents. Driving through Colombia on the Pan American Highway, particularly in the Andes, it's very difficult to turn off because it's farmland, like fenced off farmland for most of the things. We were running late, getting dark. I literally pulled into a farm, knocked on the door and said, "Do you mind if we like camp in your front paddock?" They said, "Of course you can. Please come in." And we set up camp. Then they offered for us to use their bathroom facilities, and they made breakfast for us the next morning. So, that was Colombia in the, scary times, so to speak. And I often throw it around. Just imagine if a big truckload of Colombians or Latins showed up on your doorstep and asked to camp in your front yard. Would you let them? Like, of course you wouldn't. And that was the perfect example of how friendly Colombia was and is. So, yeah, I concur 100% with that. Just to sort of somewhat off topic, I guess. This is really for my curiosity. Your neighbor, Venezuela, has there been any issue from a political point of view, like with immigrants coming across? I know they were at one stage being influxed into Colombia. And two, just from a general point of view, seismic, because Colombia is in part of the Andes, it is seismic. Did you guys get any sort of aftershocks from the big earthquakes that hit down there recently? Let me ask
They
Juan that
felt,
question.
I think, felt in Bogota, but we didn't feel anything in Medellin.
To the degree that Venezuela.
No, and
Okay.
I just answered. Interesting, you asked that question on the refugees. A client of ours, an operator in Europe, was asking the very same question, and actually, because of the earthquakes, there was a worry that we might see a big rise in Venezuelans. It hasn't happened, and in fact, since Maduro is no longer in his seat of power in Caracas, quite a lot of Venezuelans are beginning to go back.
Really?
And yeah, and some go back temporarily and divide between the two countries because they've been here a long time and they set up their businesses and they have a life here. But it isn't the same as it was, and we don't have this draw of the border now, bringing people up to the border with Panama so they can continue north. And that was not just Venezuelans, it was Haitians and Cubans and people from African countries. That has died. The refugee camps in Necoclí have closed, and I mean, they can't get across the border into the United States now, and they know it.
Right.
So, apparently it's so quiet you can hear the crickets chirping on the border with the United States. So the draw is not there. And in Medellin, for example, in the bus terminals, you would see quite frequently groups of foreigners heading on the buses to the north to get over into Panama. You don't see that anymore.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it is. It's a different world now.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because as Juan can attest to, living in Canada, like the news you only get about Venezuela, well, news is always negative for the moment. Well, that's what news is supposed to report what's going on. But it was the negative thing at one stage of immigrants, refugees, back and forth across the border and stuff like that. So it's good to hear that things have, again, it has no real impact on a traveller, to our agents out there. This is more of a curiosity question from my point of view, wondering how things had, if they had changed, and obviously through Brendan's statement, they have changed. And it's good to see that people are heading back to their home country of Venezuela, because I know we're here to talk about Colombia. Venezuela is a stunning country in itself as well. So it's a shame it's been sort of ostracized, at least from a tourism point of view, over the last recent history. A wealth of information. And as we discussed at the beginning of the podcast, this is not about the big famous sites, though I think as the guys have definitely made out. And I like what Brendan said. I think the diversity is the go-to for Colombia. It has so much variance from every levels, from accommodation through to experiences, be it classical, for want of a better term, something that's not often brought up. I know Juan does because it's his job. You have the Pacific as well as the Atlantic stroke or Caribbean stroke Atlantic Ocean. So you have the two oceans as well. Something that was sort of, we touched on in a previous podcast, which was touched on very lightly here. You can do a river cruise now with Arma Waterways, which Goway can help you with in Colombia, which this is how it's developing and expanding beyond the norm. So let me get to some logistical questions. Juan, we to get to Colombia. The good thing about Colombia is it's at the top of the continent or the South American continent, so it's closer than the Ecuadors and Peru. So that's always a positive. I know connectivity is quite strong out of Canada. Can you speak to that as well as connectivity into Colombia and regionally out of the US and Canada, please?
Okay, so talking about Canada, that is actually the destinations that you ever see. We are connected with the three major airlines that are Transat or Canada. We have Avianca as well. We were, on an idea of getting a new flight with WestJet this year, but fuel price made things happen, and nothing comes out, unfortunately. But nowadays, what we have is Air Canada, and Transat, and Avianca, the three of them connecting to Colombia with direct flights from Toronto and Montreal to Bogota and Cartagena. Good news for this year, we extended the flight that we normally used to have in the winter season. They extended to the summer season, so we have direct flights right now to Cartagena from Toronto until October. Actually, Air Canada is going to increase its operation actually by October into 4 frequencies, and they're going to add a Dreamliner, which will make the travel more effective and actually a little bit shorter because of the plane and I guess a little bit more comfortable. So yeah, things are happening when it comes to connectivity. Obviously, it is still a challenge, not because of Colombia, but because of the industry, the things that are happening in the industry right now with the fuel prices and so on.
Yeah.
But fortunately, we do have air connectivity, direct air connectivity from Canada. If we talk about the indirect, we will talk about Copa Airlines, obviously connecting through Panama City, for example. We could talk about Aeromexico, for example, connecting to Mexico City and then Mexico City to other destinations in Colombia. We could add also, for example, Dominican Republic with AutoJet connecting through Santo Domingo and then Santo Domingo to other destinations in Colombia, and so on. I'm not going to mention US because I know for Canadians, US right now is not the thing, but mainly with these destinations you can connect indirect. If we talk about US is actually the number one country when it comes to air connectivity to Colombia, and actually is the number one country when it comes to the majority of international travels that we're receiving is from US. US represents around 26 to 27% of the international travelers that we have in Colombia. So because of that, we have a lot of connectivity, with the major hubs, let's say Atlanta, New York, Miami, Chicago, and so on. So there's a lot of connectivity. The connectivity with US is bigger, obviously, than Canada. But the good thing, as I'm telling you, is you can travel direct flights with no issues, and it's actually quite affordable. If you think about a flight, for example, sometimes from Toronto to Vancouver, it could be even more expensive if you travel from Toronto to Colombia. So it's kind of like that. Sometimes it happens. So that's a good thing about also Colombia.
With your statistics for the US travelers, do you have a breakdown whether that's business or recreational?
It's mainly like 85% is leisure. The rest of it is, the majority of the travelers we receive is leisure for sure. We do have a little bit of corporate incentive, all the MICE industry, but it's not the biggest one. It's the majority of them is leisure for sure.
Okay. So on that note, for anyone out there who does groups and MICE travel, that type of thing, Colombia obviously in its main cities particularly is very well geared towards large groups of description. And I guess what's really important too, if you're dealing with groups out there, we didn't really get into it in detail, but it was mentioned a few times. There's the art side of the cultural aspect of Colombia. There is the music side as well. So if you have groups out there who are music groups, art groups, or cultural groups, one of the things I remember as a tour leaders, we had a Canadian lady, coincidentally enough, who was with us in Bolivia, and she had a group back home. They were into textiles and knitting, and she went crazy in Bolivia with all the the ponchos and the tulus, the hats and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure Colombia has equivalent when it comes to textiles as well. In short, obviously Colombia is good for groups, be it en masse for business or a little bit more specific, and particularly if it's a hobby or an interest that they may have. Brendan, we did sweeping, or you answered in sweeping statements about all the things you can do in Colombia, mentioning different cities and regions and ways of getting out. Is there anything new on the horizon that you'd like to mention to Goway and in turn our partners out there that people should be aware of, be it mainstream or be it more remote and unique?
New? Well, I mean, not, a bit stuck on that question.
Okay, that's right. I can
I mean,
rephrase it.
there are there are new hotels. I'm going to
Okay.
be in Cartagena this weekend, and one of the reasons I'm going is to look at some new boutique hotels in the center.
When
I
you
mean,
say
I
the
think
center,
in terms of
when you
logistics, there are a lot of people here find flying within Colombia as well very, very convenient,
okay,
and a pleasure compared to flying domestically in other countries, and that's also a very good thing. But sorry,
yeah,
what was your question?
no, that was no. You answered it for me actually. But one thing I like to point out again from firsthand experience is Colombia is again compared to Canada is not big, but it's it's a reasonably sized country. But what's key to it is the Andes run right up, almost if not the middle, definitely to sort of the left hand side of it as you look at a map. And having driven it, it's beautiful to drive around, but it's up and down the hills, up and down the Andes. So to Brendan's point of flying around, I think this is a pretty obvious answer, but let me ask it, Brendan. The best way to see multiple areas of Colombia, be it the sort of the highlights or be it the more remote stuff we've touched on today, would be flying to get to these different points, correct?
That's correct. Although there are some great overland journeys that can be done even in a shorter itinerary. For example, Coffee Region to Medellin,
Okay.
absolutely stunning. The road is pretty much finished and it's brand new and it's really really well done. Also, Cartagena to Santa Marta
Yeah.
is another overland, and then maybe from Barichara to Bogota via Via de Leyva. So yes, flying is fundamental unless you have a month or 2 months
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
travel around. But and some areas like the Pacific Coast, for example, from Medellin, it's a 40-minute flight. You can't get there by road.
Right.
The only other way would be to come up the coast on a boat. So going to like Bahia Solano, you have to fly over the jungles and the mountains to get there, which is a completely different area, which we haven't touched on, but also incredible food, some of the best food in Colombia. A fish soup on the Pacific coast is the most amazing creation on the planet.
Right.
If I may add something,
Yeah.
Don, if I may add something,
Please.
when you ask about new things, and when you ask, I will say, talking about trendy, and we do a very very good research in terms of all the time, always researching like what are the new trends that are happening, what are the travelers looking for into Colombia, sorry, from Canada and from other countries. We have seen actually an increase in terms of and a growth of more authentic and meaningful travel experiences
Yeah.
beyond
100%.
our traditional destinations. So travelers are discovering new regions and connecting with local communities in a much deeper way than before. So for example, community-based tourism has become a major focus with experiences where visitors can learn directly from local communities, indigenous groups, Afro-Colombian communities, and so on. So I think from a trend position, that will be something new. But Brendan mentioned something really cool and really, really important. That is our cuisine and our gastronomy. And I think that's we have seen a huge development and evolution into the gastronomy scene of Colombia. Right now, you're seeing, for example, the number one restaurant when it comes to the 50 best worst restaurant in Latin America is in Bogota, and it's called El Chato. So if you see that the number fifth bar in the world, in the 50 best world bars, is in Cartagena, that is Alquímico. So you realize that gastronomy scene is happening in a very evolution that you can find actually even at the same level of Peru or other competitors that before used to be like the major leagues, and
Yeah.
Colombia was like here. Right now you see Colombia in the major leagues of gastronomy for sure, because of the different new propositions that have come out into the cuisine and into the gastronomy and the evolution of that. So right now you can go there, and it's a good way also to say that it's kind of affordable if you compare it into other destinations in a very high-end gastronomy. In affordable way, you could get really, really nice food, and it's very diverse as well, as Brendan was saying, like every region from other.
And
Yeah,
I think it
I'm
always
glad.
exceeds. It always exceeds expectations. The food, because Peruvian cuisine has a fame like Italian or Chinese, but Colombian food doesn't really. And so people like the destination. They are always the reality exceeds the expectation in terms of the destination and definitely in terms of the food.
Yeah,
It
I'm
was
glad you both.
delicious.
I'm glad you both brought that up in particular to focus on because Brendan, I was going to say to you, I think you might have fallen in love with Colombia on your first travel trip. I think your second love is their food because you because you brought that up many times throughout your conversation today in each different region. Oh, this is really good. Oh, but the food is great as well. This is really good. Oh, but the food is really good as well. So,
Yeah, well,
and again,
yes, yeah.
no, it's good. Like I can attest to that as well because we would spoil ourselves at a nice restaurant, particularly in Cartagena and Bogota, as we're overlanding. And this is, a long time ago. It was stunning then. But even one of my favorite memories of Cartagena is walking down to the docks in the morning and getting a fruit smoothie. There used to be, I know it's probably changed now, all these little fruit vendors on the dock side there, and they do your fruit smoothies, and it was just like cost nothing, and it was healthy and awesome. Um, Again, a curiosity question for myself. I always recommend driving around the country because that's what I used to do as a living. It's, I think, one of the best ways, but it does entail needing more time to do it. But Brendan, you mentioned one of the really cool drives is from Cartagena to Santa Marta or vice versa. And again, this is just a question for myself. When we used to do the drive, I can't remember the name of the area, but it was a coastal thing. And I think it was a causeway that was built along the seafront, and it was an ecological disaster at the time because by building this causeway, they blocked the tidal flow to this wetland area. And as you drive to Santa Marta to your right, you'd see all these. It was rather pretty from a artistic photographic point of view, but sad because all these dead mangroves and stuff. I think we spoke about this a podcast or two ago. I think you said that that has recovered. Is that right? And do you know what I'm even talking about?
Yeah, no, I do know the area you're talking about. It looks a bit lunar when you get up close to it.
Yeah.
Some of it has recovered, yes, but there are still parts of it which are, yeah, it's a shame. I mean, it does make the road, the drive, pretty spectacular.
Yes.
Because, you've got the ocean on one side where it is quite rough in that area with the waves
Yeah.
crashing in. And then the other side, you have mangroves that are healthy and beautiful, and then some areas where they have been parched. But I believe, Juan might know more than me, that there is a project to expand that road now into a double highway. So God knows what the results of that will be. We shall see. But now in Colombia, there is a lot of sustainability practices as well in construction. You can't just build something and destroy like you might have been able to do when that road was originally built. There are more controls now on that type of project. Yeah.
And again, I don't mean to infer that it was done willingly to destroy. I think it was done unknowingly, that they didn't realize the impact it was going to have. But I was just curious as times have changed. And I do remember we spoke about it once before, and I think you'd said, well, as you said now, it is starting to recover naturally, but hopefully they'll be more responsible should they look to expanding it. Okay, then. So some key things, I think, before we say goodbye. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to this line because I really like it. The go-to for Colombia is its diversity, is its variance in things to see and do, the cultural immersion that you can have, be it a couple of hours from the big cities, Cartagena, Medellin, Bogota itself, or if you are more adventurous and you are truly seeking something new and unique, which is something Juan brought out in regards to what's new and trending. And we've seen this as well, that people are coming to us and in turn looking to these countries for less traveled, unique, more immersive, also spending a bit longer and truly enjoying, be it your 5-star hotel or being at your rustic lodge off in Los Llanos, taking photos of birds. Colombia definitely has all of the above. It is definitely gearing itself and positioning itself for the traditional destinations, but also for this diversity, which we've discussed today. And again, if you have a client that's interested, there's a lot to offer in South America, and Colombia should not be forgotten. Don't just automatic. I'm talking to our travel agents out here now. Don't fall back on the usual Ecuador, Peru, Chile, Argentina, which are beautiful. Love them to death myself. I'm sure Juan and Brendan have traveled there as well and can attest to their beauty. But often Colombia to this day is forgotten about. And it's not for old reasons. It's just a lot of people don't maybe think about it for the reasons we've discussed today. It's biodiversity, its cultural diversity, its modern offerings, its sort of more rustic offerings. It's all there. It's easy to get to, as Juan clearly stated, particularly from Canada and the US, like direct flights left, right, and center in. Air Canada, for our Canadian listeners, is expanding, and they don't expand unless there's demand. The demand is there. It's an affordable country. It's on par with anywhere else in South America. You have luxury, as I mentioned. You have rustic. You have river cruises. You have coastal cruises. Um, you have modern history things like the troubled times. They've become tourist destinations now. Tours for Escobar's antics as well. It's all now a tourist attraction. So the country's got everything you could possibly want, and it's friendly, it's safe at all levels. So please, please, please keep Colombia at the top of your list when someone comes to you with a request for South America, or if they're unsure, give Colombia a fair shot of what it has to offer, because it's got it all. So before we say goodbye, let me start with Brendan. Is there anything else you'd like to leave our listening audience with before we say adios?
Well, no, just to add to your comment, to come to Colombia and have the time of your life, I think is a message, and that it will always exceed the expectations of people going there. And people go there, we have to be honest, with a little bit of trepidation and an awful lot of ignorance. And within a very short period of arriving in the country, they are changing the chip and thinking, oh my God, not like I thought. And the charm and openness of the people makes people feel very cozy and warm and safe and looked after in Colombia. And that, no matter the cultural background or the different regions you're in, you will feel that people they want to host you in this incredibly diverse and beautiful country. So yeah, it should be top of the list all the time because it has everything in one country.
Yeah, exactly. And 100%. Juan, anything you'd like to say before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I would like to finish with what you started. That is like beyond the walled city of Cartagena, we have an incredible historical depth of across the country. So just to mention some destinations before we go, because I know that always travel agents are asking about that, like destinations, for example, like Mompox, that is a preserved colonial jewel frozen in the time, along with the Magdalena River, or the San Agustin Archaeological Park, that is home to the largest group of religious monuments and megalithic sculptures in South America. Just to give you two examples of two opposites, one in the Caribbean, another one in the Andes. Each side tells a distinct chapter of our history, offering advisors a chance of, to build rich multi-stop historical itineraries wherever they go. So just, that to keep in mind, that as Brenda mentioned, and also as well, is way beyond Cartagena, it's way beyond Bogota, it's way beyond Medellin, because it has a lot of new destinations. And when I say new, is because, new for them to watch, and new for them to visit, and new for them to experience.
Okay. Let me ask you this just before we do say goodbye. Juan, as you and Brendan have been talking about these different areas, there's some I know, like in my head, I know on a map where it would be, and others I don't know. Now, a lot of our agents out there probably know where Cartagena and Bogota is, maybe Medellin and Cali. Do you being pro Colombia, have a tourist map that highlights some of the areas we discussed today that I could either put up on our visual podcast here or make available to our agents?
Yeah, actually, more than a map, we have, for travel agents, we have a specialist program where they can go to the specialist program and become a certified specialist agent as a Colombia specialist agent. And there they can find a lot of, tools. They have marketing tools, they have handbook manuals, for example, who have beautiful handbook manuals of nature and adventure, of culture, of the Magdalena River, of butterflies. We have practical guides that they can learn to, for example, we have a practical guide of cycling. We have a practical guide for diving. So we have different tools in that specialist course that they can access to, that is colombiaspecialist.com. We also have our official website, that is colombia.travel/en, where they can find all the information, where to go, what to do. They have the different maps of the different regions, all the variety of destinations they can find. And we also have our YouTube channel, that is Colombia Travel, where you can find documentary series, videos, and a lot of new things to get inspired about Colombia in a more like graphical way.
Juan, if I didn't know better, I'd say you're trying to cut Goway out here because you've given our agents all the information they should be coming to us for.
Yeah, for sure, and actually, it's been great. Don, the job that you're doing here in Canada business with you, Go is one of those tour operators that we really always like to work with, because the way you understand Colombia, the way you perceive Colombia, the type of packages that you have for Colombia is way different of the mainstream things that we see. And obviously, you are in the best hands with Colombia 57, one of the main and most, from my perspective, one of the most representative DMCs that we have in Colombia for sure.
Yeah. Now, Goway, as our agents know, we specialize in our regions. You'll only speak to someone who sells Latin America in this instance. And by extension, we partner with the best in country, and Colombia 57 have been with us for a while now, and they're fantastic. As Juan says, we trust them emphatically with our clients or your clients, more to the point, when they're in Colombia. And more importantly, as I think you've heard today through Brendan's answers, their local knowledge and looking beyond the norm to offer Goway and in turn you more and inclusive and immersive experiences down there. So on that note, I'd like to thank Brendan coming all the way from Medellin. I'd like to thank Juan coming from about 15 kilometers down the road in his Toronto office. And as always, I'd like to thank you out there carving out an hour or so of your day. And until next time.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Hasta luego.
Ciao, ciao.